No mai haere mai. Welcome to Farmers in the Field, where our Earthworker alumni share their regenerative organic horticulture projects. Join us in co-learning through these biology-first conversations and growing radical hope through food. You can hear about our mentors in episode 1. Come join us.
Korihi te manu, te kiri mai te ata, ka awa te tihe mauri ora. Kia ora koutou, e Pākehā ahau, ko wera, ko ingarihi, ko kotarani, ko ingarihi o ku iwi, I tipu aki ahau I a Tamaki Makaurau, I noho ana au ki Wanganui, ko Emma Morris tōku ingoa. Kia ora koutou, my name is Emma. I have moved down to Wanganui a couple of years ago, about 2 years ago, to establish this kaupapa known as the learning environment. So our charitable trust has purchased about 70 hectares of regenerating land, which is just on the banks of the Wanganui River, known as Pīwakawaka Farm. And we are growing an education centre here on the land, which is all about demonstrating regenerative waterways and food systems, equitable communities, health and well-being, and future resilience in the face of climate change. Our regenerative food systems team on the farm is known as Thriving Kai, and the Thriving Kai team has a bunch of different growing areas that we are establishing. So we have some annual Mara Kai areas, which is in that the brown boxes on the left, the Kai structures, and we're expanding out into the purple areas for more food growing spaces. And then we've got some existing heritage apple orchards, which is in the light blue colour. And that is areas that we are starting to diversify and just add in some more fruit trees and some perennials and do some guilds around each fruit tree. And then we're starting to do some more intensive food forestry on the lime green areas, which are the northern slopes, and then integrate all of that with our regenerative ecological systems, so along the waterways and in the valleys and wetlands as well. And then just weave education into all of that. So here's some pictures of our Thriving Kai team, getting all the yummy kai. So it's all about applying and demonstrating regenerative food systems so that we can grow local nutrient-dense organic kai for local people here in Wanganui, so that we can support people to have access to healthy kai and reconnect to food practices and ancestral foodways. So we've been experimenting with running a CSA model, a community supported agriculture model, where we've been doing, we've done 3 seasons of this, of weekly kai boxes, and people pick it up from the local market. We've done 3 seasons of that, and then this summer we're looking to shift to a different model, which is what we're calling at the moment a koha kai model, where the focus is more about just producing kai that we can gift back out, so that we can feed this wider project, so all the staff and volunteers and the courses that we're running here on the farm, as well as take it out to wider community events and services in Wanganui. So we just had our native planting day, where we had 2 native planting community days over the last month, and we just had one on Friday, and we managed to feed a whole bunch of people from the community with kai that was grown from the farm. This is a picture from the first one, which had about 50 people, and then we had about 80 at the second one. We've also got a bunch of things coming up over the summer, like a climate camp for rangatahi. It's being held which is a week long on the farm. And so the idea is to grow all the food to feed that course. So yeah, we're just starting to plug into the existing Kai sovereignty movement in Wanganui so that we can grow local Kai and support Wanganui to have a culturally rich, regenerative food system. Kia ora koutou, thanks for listening.
I'm Sarah Smuts-Kennedy. I'm really excited to be here with Emma and Leo from Pīwakawaka Farm, with our other mentors, Levi Brinsdon-Hall and Daniel Schuurman, for Farmers in the Field.
Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou. Welcome to Pīwakawaka Farm. We're just here in the Marakai, where we have lots of our vegetables and flowers growing. And if you can see this way, it kind of opens up, and we've just done some new contouring out on the edges. We've got some other people around who are planting native trees, so you might see them in the background. But yeah, we're just here in sort of the classroom edge of the Marakai. So there's been a lot that I learnt from Earthworkers this year. I was in the Auckland one in, was it May? And I think one of the biggest things was around just trusting that a lot of the nutrients that we need are already in the soil rather than keep putting it in, because we were doing a lot of compost, putting a lot of compost in the gardens, and now we've got the clear message to stop doing that. And also, yeah, just around the importance of starting the process really strong at the start with when we're actually sowing the seeds. So we've invested a little bit into some better trays, and we've just been really honing our soil mix and have just done a lot of getting better and more solid on how we propagate the seeds at the beginning and put the effort in there, knowing that we'll reap the rewards later down the line. Yeah, we've both been having a think and thought that we could do one each. Because my focus is more in the Marakai here with the annuals. And I've been working with Leo on developing polycrop guilds for over the summer, and we've spent a lot of time planning them out with the help of Levi, which has been awesome. And then we went through and tried to plan when we would sow everything so that they would be ready to plant, but have found that quite difficult. So just wondering if you have advice around how do you line up the timing of when you sow your guilds so that then they're all ready to plant at the same time?
We can definitely answer that question. And it's one of the great skills that you'll learn through this journey. But really awesome to hear that you're investing you've invested in some new propagation equipment and getting your mix right, because once you can get that right, and once you can be germinating sort of 50 to 60 species from seed, and you get more confident, especially with the type of tray that you've got, and your method of propagation is going to determine at what point that seedling is going to be ready. But in terms of we could break this down on an Excel spreadsheet and figure it out quite quickly, but the advice I'll give now is when we're talking about guilds, in general there's two type of crops that we want to put in them, and the way that I look at it is you've got a long-term crop, one or more long-term crops, and then one or more short-term crops. So an example of that would be, I'm just imagining what's in the field at the minute. We've got leeks and celeriac. They're both a long-term crop, and around them we've got coriander, lettuce, and beetroot maybe. And then those are the fillers. So the important thing is the long-term crop is going to be in the ground much longer. So you are afforded a bit of a window there with, if your long-term crop isn't ready, you can put it in a little bit later. But really the most important thing to do is generally those crops that take longer to grow, in the summertime, we're kind of talking capsicums, aubergines, leeks take forever to be ready as a seedling. Celery and celeriac, they take forever as well. And those ones you really want, if you got your guild, you got your species, you need to think, okay, what's going to be the longest one, and then what's going to be the second longest, and then what's going to be the second longest, and you just stagger them up. But in terms of your guilds and having them all ready at the same time, it's really important to focus on those long-term crops. And if it is leek, and if it is tomato or capsicum, what I would advise is the decision on when to sow that. We're always starting our thinking with the long-term crop, what takes the longest. So you've got a succession for those crops. So if it's like capsicums, then you're only really going to sow them on maybe 2 days in the springtime. And so you're going to get those successions right, and then they're going to go on to be ready. But it is that whole game of getting everything ready at the same time. You have to, you can make your plans, but you have to also be ready to work with what comes throughout the process, because when you're germinating, that many different trays of that many different species, sometimes it can be difficult to stick to your plan. And yes, ultimately we do want to be sticking to our plans, because that's then we're going to be masters, and we're going to reach that level where we can plan for our production, which is what we want. But really, for instance, if you don't have beetroot ready and you're like, oh no, I don't have beetroot, it's like not the vegetable you might have that you could swap that beetroot out with. All you're looking for something in the guild is that plays that role of a crop that's going to, fill that space. If something doesn't work out in your plan, you can replace it with another suitable species. That's the best thing about polycropping. If you've got multiple guilds that you're designing and you're fitting multiple different species in them, there's a leniency that you have to swap crops out with other ones. It's perfectly okay. When you have a problem is when your more mature species then fail. So yeah, the most important ones to focus on for your propagation are those ones that are going to be in their plugs for a long time. And if you can get them going and you're sowing regular diverse amounts of other things, you can whip them all together. But really it's just a conversation of think about the successions, because you don't want to be sowing lots of coriander all at once. You want to be doing it, are you going to be doing it 2 weeks apart? You're going to be doing it 1 month apart, and just really lock them in. And do you have ear pruning cells as well? Is the other thing that I'll say? Did you get some ear pruning ones?
Yeah, we bought some. We don't have like enough or as much as we would like, but with our current finances, we bought some, and they're them.
But, Levi, explain why they're so good for people who are watching this who don't understand why the ear pruning cell is going to help so much in this instance.
Specifically handy for those longer term crops, because the ear pruning cells mean that the seedlings have a larger planting window. If it's a traditional seedling where the root just goes down at the bottom and there's one single hole, the plant's going to get root bound and the roots are just going to go round and round in circles. And a lot of things, you've got a very small window to plant them. But that's why we recommend people use a larger ear pruning cell, as in one of the what the forestry use, because there's a much longer window. And for that purpose, Emma, it'd be good you can start those things a little bit early, just to make sure that they are mature and that they're there and they're ready. And then in terms of what you underplant all your mature longer term crops with, that can be anything. Whether it's a spring onion, a beetroot, a coriander, parsley, a lettuce, it's all good.
I guess the key in what you're trying to solve is that planning, recognizing that actually planning is required. And the more planning you actually do in terms of trying to document that, the critical thing about that is you've done that step, but then you need to record the results, so that next year when you pull that same plan forward, you've actually got the results of what happened. In terms of you always should run, as good horticultural practice, you should have a thing called a propagation diary, right? Which tells you every single day you write down what you planted, what you sowed, what cuttings or whatever you made, what you made on that date. And then same thing as when you come to a planting date, as you follow that through, you write down what you've actually done with that crop and when it was harvested as part of that diary. So that's essentially, I guess, the difference between moving to a more professional level of planning and understanding is a lot about recording the results of what you actually do. So you've got that as a reference for next year, which allows you to actually grow. Otherwise, you have to use your memory, and that becomes harder and harder across a greater and greater number of crops. So, the spreadsheet in this particular case is useful, but the diary is the thing that actually records what you did. The spreadsheet was the plan you created of what you wanted to do, right? The diary is the thing of what actually happened. And those two things together form the basis of how you actually create that planning and improving it long term. So it doesn't matter what else you do, you've got to have that data. And you can also pass that on if you've done it properly. You can either keep that, retain it, or it can easily be passed on to the next person that comes along that might be taking over the role if somebody else moves along. You know, those are incredibly valuable resources after a while.
Yeah, nice. That's really helpful. I think because we got so excited about the guilds that we planned that I've become quite attached to them, but we need to be able to just like have some flexibility around just like centering the main crop, and then we can swap things out if they haven't grown yet, and then make sure that we record what actually happened. Yeah. And so we'll know. Yeah.
Some of our conditions are changing a bit as well, such as our seed raising mix and what varieties we're using. One of the takeaways I got there was that we'll just learn from experiences around timings of specific plants, and we're going to build a new propagation house soon, which might have conditions. And also, I'm realizing now that a lot of our seed is a bit older. Some of it's maybe on or past its sort of expiry date, and we have some more intermittent germination with them. So as those variables level out, I think that diary keeping will be coming into its own then.
Are you storing your seed with mycorrhizal fungi dust spores?
Yeah, everything that we've started sowing this season since we got it from Daniel, we've been putting the dust on.
But you can actually put it into your seed packets, and it helps them store better.
It does, but it doesn't necessarily make old seed young.
Of course.
So, and seed quality is a big thing. I'm sure we've all experienced that. You know, sometimes that stuff that you buy can have some pretty shocking germination rates. And what I've experienced is whenever you've sort of managed to collect and harvest some of your own seed, and like there's certain crops where that's extremely easy. The germination rate from your own seed often is massively superior, and I think it has a lot to do with age. So just be aware of that. I mean, traditionally, you can do germination trials as well if you're worried about how old seed is. Before you sow it out, you can soak it, let the seed the radicle, you'll actually see it like germinate. You can still sow that. But if you do like 10 seeds, you can also see how many of them actually germinated. You only get 3. Right, out of 10, you're probably better to chuck the seed away and actually get some fresher seed in terms of what you're using. So you can do if you've got seed that's been kicking around for a while and you're wondering what the results are, if you look it up, you can just like soak them, put them between wet paper, put them in a moist area, so keep them moist and warm and let them germinate in there so you can actually count the germination accurately. That's just a real simple test. And if the seeds really are quite poor, in the sort of given space, or they're very uneven, then you're looking at the actual seed being the problem, not the actual propagation techniques and soil and everything else that you're using. So age of seed is a big one.
And if in doubt, you sprinkle it on more generously. Good seed, you only need to use one seed, it'll go, right?
Thing is, you might get 3 in one and none in the next, though. It really comes down to you want a really, really good cracking result. I mean, even the vigor that's left in the seed, poor seed, poor germination, quite often the seedling really isn't that, even the ones that germinate aren't that great. You know, if you got really good seed, they literally roar out of the ground at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and they just pump from day one. If the seed's got no energy, it's just dried up, shriveled. It's like, you're just creating a battle for yourself. And if the seedling's not top notch, if the seedling you're planting isn't absolutely, a great quality plant, then you're just going to deal with stress and issues, and more likely to have disease, and there's a whole range of things that come. So you're really, really looking for the best possible quality seed and seedlings to get started, and the rest becomes much easier.
And this is really funny, because what you end up doing is sort of throwing out whole trays of seedlings that you've got an attachment to. Sometimes you just got to kill them. If they're not healthy, all they're going to do is create problems for you down the line. Start again and just chuck them in your compost. They're fine.
So that also part of your planning is like, having those extra things there that you haven't necessarily, haven't planned for, but are there for backup. So if you do have a failed crop, you actually do have excess. Kind of easier to deal with your excess seedlings than it is to wait 3 months for something to kind of be ready to go in. So,
It also allows you to be picky and only plant the best. Yeah. That's the thing that I was taught really early on in propagation. If you've got abundance, you do only plant the very best, and do try and discard ones that just aren't up to scratch, because it will make a difference. So a second-rate seedling just proves as a second-rate plant. It never really recovers.
Yeah.
We've got another question, I think. One more question.
Oh, sure. I was just going to say, I love that image of the seeds roaring out of the ground.
Yeah, well, we've all seen it happen, right? And you go, what's happening there? So, that's kind of, that's what we're trying to work towards, is that it becomes the normal. And, I have, for example, a lot of the original seed from OMG came from me, and that often came from like a koanga where I got almost no germination rates whatsoever, and I just get one or two things that would fire, and I'd have to be really disciplined and saving that for seed. And then the following season I was away. So, if you've got space, I don't know how much space you have, but, it's really worthwhile starting to invest, if you can, in seed saving of some sort. I think it's, in terms of kind of just planetarily how things are going, it really is stupid not to step up into that space on the crops that you can.
Next question from me. Here at Pīwakawaka Farm, we have multiple spaces that we're growing food in and working in, and I am mostly working in our orchards. We have 2, which we're working on interplanting. Now, a couple of context pieces to this question is that we're really spread out around a lot of workspaces and projects, so we don't have heaps of time to spend doing the best we can in a space, but we want to be effective still. And the other context point is that we will have some syntropic food forestry and all sorts of different showcase spaces. So in this orchard, we are looking to simply diversify and underplant what is basically a conventional orchard, mostly apples. We will throw some other. So my question is, how can I effectively implement underplanting in this orchard? I have bulbs and dahlias and things I can pop in and comfrey, but also I want to be planting things from seed like yarrow and nasturtium and all sorts of things. I don't want to spend much time digging, but all I can think of is to clear sections, sow seed and place shade cloth on top and stop it being dug up. But I want to know if you can suggest for.
So give us an idea of scale, and it'd be really great to know, like, how wide are the rows between your trees, and what is the, basically square meter area you're talking about. And also apples. Just to let you know, we're not keen on digging at all. So, yeah.
Yeah, very aware of that, and neither am I, and that's why I really wanted to hear what you had to say about this. So the orchard I'm talking about is just over 100 meters by 100 meters wide. It has about, each tree is between 1 meter and 2 meters away from its neighbors. It has been planted really densely, and we are taking some trees out where they are completely interlaced with their branches, but mostly there's good light wells in between the trees. They're about 8 years old and they're still growing. They're also in some places a little bit stunted by having a very high water table, and it drains well, but the water is present at root level fairly often.
There's one potential suggestion as to we might, is probably way past that being 8 years old to be able to do anything as far as it structurally goes with pruning them. What I've found works underneath fruit trees, and looking for trying to plant beneficial plant species, to attract beneficial insects and that sort of stuff, is that there were some seed species that needed covering and there were some that didn't in that particular group of plants that are commonly used. So what I did, we just put we put the seed in basically on top of the ground without doing any cultivation. The seed that needed covering, we covered with a light layer of compost. I mean a really light layer of compost, just basically enough to create that kind of seed bed. And then the seeds that required the light that need to be on top, we just sowed that on top of the compost, and we simply kept that moist. And they actually germinated surprisingly easy in spring, and that worked very well. And you could actually do that with a relatively small amount of compost over a relatively large area. That's if you were looking specifically to sow seeds. So that could be something that was done on. So you've got a hectare essentially, is what you're saying, 100 meters by 100 meters. So it's 2.5 acres. So that would be certainly one way of introducing those sort of species very easily, with relatively low cost. If you're wanting to then some of the plants where you're obviously going to have fruit, like any orchard, there'll be trees that potentially need to come out because they're not really, they're suffering disease, or they've got issues, as you say, they're not dealing well with one area with a high water table, and so you start removing plants. And I guess in that situation, over a period of time, you can start introducing biodiversity in the cropping situation, in terms of obviously pulling out an apple and replacing it with something else that you're wanting to put into that space over a period of time. I just remember saying to Emma, I certainly wouldn't roar in there and just cut out every second plant, because that seems like a horrible shame. It would be something that requires patience to do over a period of time. But that sowing of those seeds and those, like saying nasturtiums and alyssum and all sorts of things that attract those beneficial insects that we're wanting to feed the pollinators as well, is really easily done, and it tends to reseed itself very effectively year after year after year. Once you put it in, it's not like you have to keep necessarily having to redo it a lot either. If it's done densely enough, you probably find that it'll deal quite comfortably with most of the species. You could certainly plant comfrey in between that. Just be aware, I'm sure everybody will warn you here with comfrey, is that it's basically a weed as far as it goes, because it can just spread everywhere. So I'd be kind of very cautious where I planted it, and so it was controlled. Otherwise, you will have an orchard that has apple trees with comfrey and nothing else. And it's not easy to get rid of once you've sort of got it. So it's useful, but just be aware of it's pretty aggressive in terms of its ability to dominate a given environment.
Oh, can I just clarify on that?
Yep.
Sowing seed, in particular with the grass, would you sow on top of the grass, or does the digging extend to, because I had considered perhaps turning the sod layer over and sowing seed onto that?
No, doing that basically is just inverting the microbial system, and it has to recover from that, and that can take a ridiculous amount of time. And you sort of, absolutely. Basically, the thing is that if you were, depending on what grasses were there, I mean, I've just mowed it. It was areas that we certainly mowed. We mowed it low. We covered it with, if you've got particular weeds that you're worried about, you can throw, cardboard or hessian or something into that. But generally, I just found compost. At the end of the day, I mean, some of those the clovers and the other things that flower, and that's all sort of brings more diversity to that. So what you're trying to do is introduce diversity, not necessarily remove the diversity that's actually there. What you're trying to do is increasing it. So don't be worried about what's already there to a large degree. You're just going to find a way of introducing other species that you want in that environment, and it's up to you what that happens to be. But yeah, I didn't bother doing anything other than mowing it quite tight, quite hard, immediately throwing the seed on it, chuck compost on top of it, throw the next lot of seed, water it in, and they're away within 14 to 21 days. And the grass underneath was pretty sort of suppressed by that layer of compost sitting on top of it anyway.
And just to be specific, like you're talking like 1 to 2 millimeters of compost there, Daniel?
I'd probably in that
Couple of
situation, realistically, it goes down as a dry, fluffy compost, probably like a centimeter or two. By the time you water it in, you're only left with, half a centimeter, but it's enough so you can't see the grass, right? It cuts out most of the light. And the idea is that we're doing this kind of once. And once these species have actually grown and flowered and self-seeded in that environment, they'll just continue to kind of do that. But yeah, it's a matter of also getting your head around the space, that space will look very different. If people are thinking of a nicely mown, tidy orchard, this is going to be a beautiful orchard full of flowers, but it doesn't necessarily fit everybody's paradigm of neat and tidy, because you've got to let it grow and flower for it to do its thing. Yeah. But it won't do anything but good for the trees. None of nobody else will complain. So just a matter of if you're prepared for that, because it will look quite different in terms of what you're trying to do. I generally only went no more than like half a meter either side of the tree, because that sort of left a path to walk in between. But I would only leave. Mind you, you're also probably getting in there. How are you? You're occasionally spraying those orchards with stuff. I mean, with
microbes.
using microbes, and how are you doing that if you do it?
We haven't yet. We've got foliar spray, but we've only been using it in the annuals so far.
Yeah, so there's a big thing in terms of lots of beneficial microbes can go into that space to help deal with and produce I guess a better quality product at the end of it, and help with tree health and environmental health. But you probably have to walk into that sort of environment. It's probably so close that you couldn't drive anything. So if you're only having to have a walking space up the middle, because say an orchard typically would leave somewhere to drive a tractor or some sort of vehicle, you might need to consider that even for harvest. It's 50 meters is a long way to walk with a full box of apples.
It certainly is. We've had access troubles in the past, but we're working on sort of like weaving pathways throughout. Yeah.
Again, though, if it's like a ley that you've planted, densely, that's coming up in the springtime. When does the apple harvest happen? In the fall? Yeah, and so you can just trample over all your ley. It doesn't. All you're doing is seeding them into the ground again.
Yeah. Walking over it, I'm just saying I wouldn't necessarily rush out there with a lawnmower and mow it.
Oh no.
But I mean, you might do that once a year. You might do that once a year. Maybe after all the seeds and flowers and stuff have fallen off, that maybe you might go through there and tidy it up a little bit and get it ready for spring again. But anyway, that's something you'll have to learn as you go a little bit as well, depending on what you're wanting to do there. But hopefully that sort of answers what you're after.
You should do a whole row of globe artichokes down one row as well.
So much globe artichoke seed. When the picture I have in my mind is to have a lot of herbal labour, also have at areas that aren't likely to be trodden on, select and precious perennials such as lovage and globe artichoke and perennial leeks and so on.
Yeah.
Rhubarb.
Yep.
Yeah.
We have been talking about I guess we both come from like permaculture backgrounds, mindsets, and we know about things that we've been told take nutrients, deplete nutrients, and then others that are dynamic accumulators, and thinking about how we balance that in the orchard. What's your perspective on that? If the concept is more like there's just fertility, abundant fertility within the soil.
Yeah, the fact is that it's about biological diversity. The greater the diversity of plants going in there, the greater the biological diversity and the greater the nutritional availability will be. But, so I don't necessarily, I think you obviously want that whole idea of coming back to what we're talking about with the 5 different sort of families of plants in there between brassicas, genopods, legumes, grasses, grains, that sort of stuff, and obviously how you fit those various different things in there, and the more species you have, the better. I think, the natural fertility is there. It's the amount of abundant life that is present will dictate how much nutrition is available. And from a nitrogen fixing point of view, the only thing you might find in the case of apples is because it's relatively still a monocrop, even in terms of what you're pulling off, apples you are extracting still a lot of potassium. So that in itself probably needs still maybe topping up from time to time to maintain that, because you are essentially removing it from the orchard in terms of not eating it, and it's leaving the whole property. It's a nutrient removal, and apples are quite, if you imagine the weight of apples that you take out of there, and the vast majority of that is actually potassium that's filling that, as well as water. But anyway, I don't think there's necessarily to get too tied down with looking from a certain species doing certain things. I think it's about diversity. And trying to build that, certain things that will self-seed, and so annuals that will just self-seed, perennials that will continue. But I sort of think if you planted all annual, self-seeding annuals first to sort of keep that side of it, and then started putting perennials in as you went along, because that's a much bigger, slower job. That's kind of how you could convert that area relatively rapidly with less work than potentially if you were to turn it entirely in perennials underneath those trees. It would take a long time and a lot of work.
Yeah, that's really helpful way to look at it.
So just to give you, in terms of like topping up with your potassium, the foliar feeds that you can use will really help with that, and getting your timing right with that too. What's the timing, Daniel, in terms of like the apple filling and what have you? When do they go on and do a feed?
I can't remember off the top of my head, I can't recall, but you want your base saturation on your soil test to be at least 5%. So I can't remember off the top of my head what yours is without looking it up. But that gives you an idea that if it's below that, then we need to add some in. And when you do that is just after the flowers, you've got the apples basically as they're being fertilized, and you've got the little apples forming. You want potassium to be available. You need it at that point. So again, look at what your soil. Have you got a soil test on that area, or is the area that you tested was different? So it might be worth considering doing that in that area, just to establish what that base is also in terms of what you're trying to do there long term. Just if you don't sort of maintain that fertility to a certain degree, keep it really pumping and healthy, orchards can just stop producing fruit, right? They can go from producing really lots of fruit to less and less and less and less until you basically get nothing. So there is they need a very, very active soil system, and they do need some proactive inputs, but it's very minimal. And there are some positive ways of doing it, using wood chips, adding wood chips in at times, because trees like lots of fungal dominance as well. So it's quite a different environment from, say, a purely annual veggie growing environment. They do like really strong fungal dominance. And wood chip bring a lot of potassium. So bringing a bit of wood chip into that. Any pruning that you do, don't leave. It should be chipped up and left in situ, or left to rot where it is, because otherwise you're simply removing that out of the nutrient cycle as well. There are some quite, not necessarily having to buy bags of fertilizer, but you just need to understand your soil system and understand what it is that might get you that result without having to do more than you absolutely need to. And that's where a soil test comes into
Exactly.
defining the baselines. You don't really know where you're starting from. Otherwise, everything's a guess.
Well, they were awesome questions, guys. Really fantastic and fabulous answers too from our team.
Yeah, that's just been so fantastic. Thank you so much. I wish we could just have you all sitting here every day so we can just bombard you with all these questions, because there's plenty more. Yeah, big take home for me is just like, I think we've done a great job in our guilds, but we just need to let go of the especially my perfectionist tendencies around the perfect guild, and just be a bit more flexible with what's going to happen with it, and then record everything so we can learn for next year.
Yeah, and I've had great reminders to just take time and do succession and just work on the diversity. That's the main thing. It can be really easy to get carried away going, I really want it to look like this now with these perennials, but to think about over time, and just that diversity is the key for the microbial health. Yeah, it's great. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. It's been great.
If you are inspired to become an earthworker and learn more about regenerative organic horticulture, look up our Earthworkers Programme on our website to register for our upcoming courses. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support us in making more, we welcome donations on our website fortheloveofbees.co.nz. For the Love of Bees is a charitable trust creating a system of self-sustaining urban farms in Aotearoa that cultivate quality food for local people through regenerative organic horticultural practices that heal the ecosystem. Through these sites, we create happier and healthier ecosystems and resilient, connected communities. We also create and share high-quality, accessible educational experiences around what a truly regenerative world looks like. For the Love of Bees aims to become a world-leading example of partnership, regeneration and participation for a thriving collective future. We started in 2016 as an optimistic and love-centred approach to engaging with ecosystem well-being in a time of climate uncertainty.